Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us for this virtual interviewing discussion. I would like to remind everybody that all questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. If you do have a question in the middle of it, you can submit it to our chat. Otherwise, please unmute yourself at the end when we ask. With that, I would like to hand it over to Emily, our Senior Client Success Manager.
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much for joining early. And Pooja and Ashwini, I know that you might be hearing this another time in your cohort, but bear with me. So everybody, again, my name is Emily Patch, and I have been in the IT staffing industry for about 8 years. So I work a lot with hiring managers and candidates as far as interviewing goes. And in fact, last night I set up 4 virtual interviews for one of my clients. So I understand how nerve-wracking interviewing can be, and especially adding technology into it, it can be very daunting. So I'm here today to really talk to you about some tips on how to be successful in your interview, relating to technology, your attire, and then just your interview prep. So most interviews are done today via Zoom, Skype, or Teams, or Google Meet. So you just want to start, getting familiarizing yourself with those type of technologies. So as far as technology goes, so I really believe that, you have to test out your technology at all times. So for me, even in preparation for this event, Megan and I tested out Zoom, trying to figure out how to do even my background here, how to mute, how to really make sure that you know how to share your screen, or just know the basics of it. So you want to make sure that your Wi-Fi is working and the camera, the audio, all of that is set up. If it doesn't work, I highly recommend making sure that you have a personal hotspot or going somewhere that you can actually make sure that your Wi-Fi is not going to be an issue. Sometimes I know other people have utilized their phone hotspots just to make sure that it works. So I would say, at least 40% of our interviewers actually have issues with the link of the interview not working. So you want to make sure that if it gets cut out during the interview or anything like that, you ask the hiring manager or the person that set up your interview prior to that, who you can contact if there should be issues. Most of the time, I send my hiring managers candidates' contact information should there be any issues with it. So I recommend you doing the same if you're interviewing directly. So most interviewers will send you a link, like I mentioned earlier. So the link will either be for a particular program. So download that program, whether it be Zoom, Skype, Team, whatever it may be, test to make sure the link actually works. I've had a few consultants actually try to test out their link and the day of, and are scrambling a few minutes before and just does not know what to do because the link isn't working. So I highly recommend testing it out ahead of time. And as I had mentioned earlier, get familiarized with the program. I've even YouTubed myself of how to use Zoom or how to use Google team meetings, things like that. So I highly recommend doing that. As far as the frame of your program, so make sure there's a bit of an empty space above your head. So like, as you can see me in this video, I have a little bit space here, and you can see, my shoulders here and chest are visible. There shouldn't be any glare or reflection, and you can even look up how to, have your own background setting. So that's what I did for today. And then I also recommend showing up a few minutes early for the interview. Don't show up too early, as sometimes hiring managers have meetings prior. And so the time that you're starting is really, the exact spot on time. So I recommend maybe logging on 3 to 5 minutes before just to make sure everything's working, just as if you show up to a regular interview early. So as far as the technology goes, so once you have that all set up, testing your Wi-Fi, making sure all of that works, I highly recommend also practicing via video like we are doing today. So pay attention to how you sound during the interview or how you are during having this kind of conversation. You want to make sure you don't sound monotone the whole time, right? You want to have some variation in your pitch. I always recommend too, smiling while you're talking. It just adds some warmth. Make sure you're having the eye contact and not wandering and looking at different screens on your computer. And then also make sure that you are in an area, where it's quiet too. Have good posture. Make sure that you don't have kids or dogs around you. That can be very distracting. So, and then as far as, just in general, when you're having a conversation over, the computer, right? Let that person finish their complete sentence. And it's okay to take a bit of a pause and let them finish before you start answering or commenting. So, excuse me. So most of these programs, actually, Zoom, Skype, whatever it may be, they do allow you to record yourself. So I recommend just doing a practice with a friend or family member ahead of time and recording, and then watching yourself so that way what you can improve on. As far as attire goes, I always recommend erring on the professional side. You are going for an interview, so you want to present yourself the best possible way, right? However, I do recommend knowing your audience as well, because we've had hiring managers tell me, hey, that candidate is just too, comes in a full suit, and the environment was for a manufacturing, organization, and they're just like, oh, I don't know if they're gonna be a cultural fit for our environment. We're very laid back here, and so just like I said, know your audience, know how to dress. You can even ask, if you have a recruiter that you're working with, ask them, hey, what do you recommend you wearing for the interview? Today I'm dressed in, a blazer and just a dress here, and I just want to make sure that I'm going to present myself how I would in an in-person interview, because you want to feel confident and competent in the entire interview. So make sure your colors look good too on the camera. The neckline is appropriate. It's not too low, especially for women. And then I also recommend not wearing, too loud of earrings or necklaces or jewelry of that sort. So it's not as distracting, right? And then make sure your hair is well groomed and out of your face. Smile, show enthusiasm. It really, again, like I said, will warm it up and will make it feel like, you're a human being, behind a virtual screen here. Now, for the most important part of the interview is just preparing for the content and material that you will be talking about. So I'm going to go into that and then also share with you the STAR methodology, which is a behavioral-based question and how to answer it that way. So to prepare for an interview, I recommend researching the company that you're going to be interviewing for. So visit their website. Usually on the website, they have a blog or a message from the CEO, or sometimes the company's financial report. So really digging into that and see what's important to this organization right now. Because if you can touch on a bit of that during your interview, that really will give you that edge, right? Because you really show that you did your homework and you are knowledgeable and resourceful. I also recommend looking up that hiring manager via LinkedIn or any other social media platform. See if you have any common connections. And if you do, reach out to that person who you have a common connection with and ask them about this person you're interviewing with. What are they like? What's their background? So this definitely can make it for a warm interview, especially if it's the person that you don't really know, but you feel more comfortable if you have a little bit of insight. I also recommend reviewing the job description and how your skills align to those to the things needed for the job. So know your resume, because anything that's on there is fair game for the hiring manager to ask about. So anything you put on there, make sure you can speak to it. And also as a reminder, all resumes should be tweaked or tailored to the job that you are applying for. You shouldn't be sending all the same one unless you're applying for the exact same role, right? Every company is looking for a little something different. So as far as answering common interview questions, a lot of people ask me, hey, Emily, what are the most common interview questions and how do I prepare for them? So the most common ones are, I have a lot, but here are some tips and the ones I hear the most. I'm so sorry. It's early in the morning here. The most common ones I hear are, tell me about yourself, or tell me about your experience or background. So you should be able to write down, a brief summary of your background and make sure that your summary is relevant to the job from a skills standpoint. For example, if you're interviewing for a project manager position in a retail industry, right? Highlight your overall experience as a project manager. And then if you have your PMP certification, if you work in an agile environment, talk about that. And then, highlight some of the places that you work that are relevant or similar industry. So let's say you worked for Kohl's department stores and now you're going to work for Jockey. Highlight that and talk about those type of environments. Some other questions I hear that are common are, why are you interested in this position? Is it the company, the industry, the job itself? Is it a career move for you? So really think through some of these questions. Another question I get that's common is, why you? What can you bring to the team? So again, review the job description and see what the required skills are and be able to speak on this. Another common question is, why are you looking to leave your current position? So in answering this, you never want to bash the organization that you are leaving, right? Talk about the true reasoning, but present it in a way that is positive and it's going to be a new challenge for you or more growth opportunity for you. So again, I do recommend you writing down your answers and then categorizing them actually as a response for, so what I mean by categorizing is, so if there's certain questions that relates to a certain category, like adversity or conflict with a teammate or a challenge or most proud of. So you can think of a scenario and then categorizing that in case during the interview, they say, tell me about a time where you faced a challenge with a teammate. How did you deal with that? And then I'm going to go into the STAR methodology soon, but you want to categorize each answer. Also, I do recommend preparing 3 to 5 questions to ask the hiring manager at the end of an interview. I've been part of interviews where the hiring manager starts out with, what questions do you have for us? So sometimes the candidate's caught way off guard and like, oh, I wasn't expecting it. I thought you would ask me all the questions first, right? So make sure you have those ahead of time, especially when you're already nervous in an interview, right? So if you have that in a notebook, when they ask you that, you're like, okay, these are things I want to know about the job. It's a two-way street, right? You need to figure out for you if this organization is a fit. And I know when you're interviewing, it's so hard to put yourself in that position, but you got to make sure the organization, aligns with what your career goals are. So also too, at the end of the interview, or as it relates to these questions, right? You want to make sure these questions are relevant to the job, the project, or the job expectations. So just by preparing all of this, it'll show that you are interested and eager for this particular role. And then at the end of every interview, I recommend asking two main questions. One, what are the next steps after this? / when can I expect an answer by? You just need to know, especially if you're going to be interviewing for multiple roles, where, when and when you can expect the answer. So that way you can set expectations with other interviews that you may have. And then my favorite question of all time at the end of every interview is asking the hiring manager this. Based on the answers I provided for you during this interview, what reservations do you have about my abilities to do this job? So this question is great because it will allow for you to address the concerns. That way they're not leaving an interview like, oh, I don't know if that candidate has enough, lead experience. Well, if you would ask them during this, at the end of the interview, you can address that and then be able to rebuttal and give answers and address that right away. Okay, so if you think about it, an interview is all about painting a picture to the hiring manager of what you've done in your past job and telling a story about yourself, right? So this can be extremely hard when you are already so nervous, especially if you haven't done it for a long time. So I recommend following the STAR methodology. It's a great way to walk through your story in a logical and clear manner. So the S stands for setting the scene for your story. When you're thinking about this, if you needed to address these questions, you need to address questions like this. So for a situation, right? What happened? How did this come about? Who was involved and what was the main issue? So that's telling the manager, here's a situation. Next, the T for task. Tell me about your specific responsibility in this situation. What responsibility did you take on to solve this problem? Did your manager assign you these tasks? Did you take on these tasks yourself? And did others have these tasks as well? So those are questions you want to address as far as task goes. The next is action. So explain the steps you took to address whatever the situation was. What did you do first? How did the situation or person respond? What did you do next? So just creating that logical order will help you. And then lastly, share the outcome of your actions that you took. So what was the end result of this whole situation? Was your manager satisfied with what you were able to deliver? Did you continue to handle the same issue as it went on? Were you giving any new responsibilities? Or was your project completed ahead of time? Did you win an award? Anything like that. You want to be able to highlight that. So again, I recommend writing down all these examples and categorizing the scenarios that could be a response to when asked a particular example. So what I've done in the past too is actually I've emailed them to myself. So that way I always have an electronic copy, especially if there's going to be multiple interviews and you just want to make sure you have these down. So if you really want to nail your next interview and show up confidently and in a virtual interview, I recommend these things. First, test your technology in the program you're using. Dress for success with the proper attire. Do some extensive research and write out your answers. Use the STAR methodology to guide your story and answer behavioral-based questions. And most importantly, always ask for the job at the end of the interview. Show them that you want it and that you are the best candidate for the position. And then I also think it's a nice touch to send a follow-up thank you letter at the end of the interview. And if you have any references or anything like that that you'd like to send along, that's a nice touch as well. So that concludes today's meeting, but I really appreciate everyone's time. I hope this was really helpful. Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah. Hi, are we supposed to unmute and ask or put that in the chat box?
You can unmute. Yep, go ahead.
Well, actually, I did already. Hi, Emily, that was very good. Thank you. So this is Claude here. I had a couple of questions. So two questions, because I know other people want to ask questions as well. Number one, I thought this webinar would also be more focused on the differences between face-to-face interview and a virtual interview. So I know you addressed the background stuff, like don't have the kids barking and the dog barking behind you, which is probably a good one. And make sure that people can see you, and in a nice, like you have a very nice background. Actually, all those tools let you actually change the background. Otherwise, for me, it's the cave. But truly, number one, what are really the one or two main differences in terms of things that you have to somehow convey in a virtual interview that are harder to get on Zoom? Like, for example, body language, right? I mean, how do you convey that? So that was my one question. Maybe I ask the second one, and I will let you answer. The second one is, and I think it's not necessarily specific to virtual interviews, a lot of us and a lot of people in my network in particular have been looking for jobs for quite a bit of time, right? Yeah. And so this is a different time, if you will. In the past, if you were asking the question, why have you been looking for a job for 2 years or a year or 6 months? Well, it would be a much harder answer to provide. Not that it's easy now, but what is your recommendation for people to basically be transparent and truthful about that question, but not necessarily minimize their chances? Okay.
Sure.
All right. Thank you.
Yes. Great question, Claude. Thank you so much. So I'll address the first question. You talked about body language and how to convey that virtually, right? I like I said, I recommend doing the video, right? You can watch yourself just like I am now talking to you, and really paying attention to, what that individual is doing behind the screen, right? Like, you can see how engaged I am just by doing this, how I'm talking with my hands and I'm nodding, I'm smiling, or my variation. So you can convey that too during your meeting. And that's why I talked about dressing the part and videotaping yourself prior to the interview, just so that you can see how you are interacting virtually, right? So does that make sense?
Yes, sorry, I'm muted, so I
don't bother. You can stay on mute. Yes. We can. It's like having a conversation.
No, I know. I'm trying to be respectful. Yeah, of course, I like the idea of taping yourself, so you can see your facial expression, but also your voice too.
Yes.
Because sometimes when we hear ourselves speak, it sounds weird. It's like,
I totally
is that really
agree.
me? Is that how I sound?
Yes, I think most people don't like to hear their voice or something. It makes them cringe. But yeah, I recommend doing that, and pay attention during the interview how that other person is reacting to your answers. And like I mentioned before, pausing and letting them completely finish their sentence. It's okay to do that. To address your other question in regards to, if you've had a gap in your resume and how to articulate that. So it really depends. I don't know your particular situation, but maybe testing it out and asking somebody, hey, what do you think about my answer with this? So I don't know your particular situation, but I would make sure that you're always showing up as, hey, you know what? I took a break in my career because, let's say, I was taking care of my family. And however, I'm very eager and want to get back into the workforce. And here's what I've done to prepare myself for the workforce, right? Or for the technology or tool or whatever the skill set is that you're going to interview for. So I would recommend, just kind of that logical order that I talked about, right? Tell them why you took a break, and now why you're ready, because you kind of have to convince them, right? And you're competing against other candidates that may have more relevant experience. So you have to be able to talk about, okay, I may not have the most relevant experience, but here's what I've done to get myself prepared and ready to get back to work. And here's, my previous experience. I have, 6 years of SAP experience, and I know I haven't worked with it in the past, 5 months, but, my level of expertise and my certification, whatever it may be, I really feel that I can hit the ground running and add value to the team.
Yeah, no, that's good. I was not necessarily asking about my own situation. I think a lot of people are asking themselves that questions all the time. But I think right now with the virus situation, people are less uncomfortable saying, look, my company had to follow a bunch of people and I was one of them. While maybe 2, 3, 4 years ago, we would have been like, wow, that's the fastest growing economy we have had in a long time. And now your company decided to let you go. That can be just because of financial difficulties, right?
Right, exactly. Be honest about that. Everybody is in that same situation as you are. And I think people are empathetic and understand what's happening in today's world. So I was part of that situation, actually. When I joined Mars, I had to tell the CEO, I said, listen, I was part of a furlough. I never thought this would ever happen to me, but I'm actively looking and really am interested in your company. And here's why.
Okay, thank you very much. Really
You're
appreciate
welcome.
your answers.
Thanks for your questions, Claude. Anybody else have questions?
Hey, Emily. Just a quick about the body language that you were talking about. Sometimes during the interview, on a virtual interview especially, if there is kind of that long pause when somebody asks you a question and when you're done, and if they don't react to you immediately, this has happened with me. So how do you react to that, or how do you keep it still going? Yeah.
I understand what you're saying. It can be very awkward. So address that, not saying it's awkward, but you can address and say, did that answer your question? Or do you have any additional follow-up question to my answer? So just ask them that.
Yeah, that's a good tip. Yeah, thanks.
You're welcome, Ashwini. Anybody else? What is your suggestion for when the interviewer asks, what are your weaknesses? What is it? Sure. I only can see part of the chat, but as far as what your weakness is. So, for example, let me tell you first. So I would always choose a weakness that you can turn into a positive. Okay. So, for example, for me, being in an organization where, and in a role where urgency and getting back to my client is very important, I say for me, my weakness is patience, right? So it's very hard for me to wait for a response. However, I want to make sure that I'm supporting my team and I'm going to be able to deliver to my client. So I do everything I can in my power to make sure that I'm reaching out to my clients when needed, and making sure that, also being cognizant and making sure that, that they might not have all the answers right away for me, but I'm always constantly communicating and working on this, and not, stressing out over my, not being able to be patient. So something along those lines, but translating it to a positivity. And if it's a requirement for the job, like I know in my position, having that urgency is really important, and getting back to people is very important. But I also know that I have to learn that I can't control everything in my scenario. So I have to learn to be patient. So something along those lines. And obviously I can definitely anybody here that is part of this meeting can reach out directly to me, and I would be more than willing to talk to you about some of your questions and kind of help you walk through those scenarios.
Awesome. Thanks, Emily. I do apologize, we do have to wrap it up here, but if anybody else has any remaining questions, please reach out to Emily. Her email address is on the screen.